Have you ever wondered how a tiny hotel receipt could shatter an entire marriage that once seemed unbreakable? Have you ever felt your heart break, not because of screaming or shouting, but because of the deafening silence from the very person who once promised to stay by your side forever? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's the journey of a woman from the deepest pain to the moment she finally stands up, clears the past away, and dares to ask herself, what kind of life do I want to live next? Welcome to Kunzy Podcast English, where stories are told with emotion, with heart, and in simple English that speaks to real life. Here, you won't just learn English through relatable and powerful stories. You'll also find parts of yourself in each one. Today, let's dive into a story that might feel all too familiar about love, heartbreak, and rebirth. A receipt, a phone, and a confrontation, each one opening a door to something no one ever expected. Let's begin the story of Clara. Life that seemed perfect. Clara, 32 years old, lived in a quaint little house in a quiet suburb. Every morning, she brewed herself a cup of black coffee and sat by the window, gazing out at the lavender garden she had lovingly tended. The sound of birdsong blended with the morning sunlight, making life feel gentle and calm. In the afternoon, she would stroll through the market, picking out fresh vegetables and slices of salmon, then return home to cook simple yet comforting meals. Dinner was always ready by 6, because at exactly 6:30, Mark and her husband would walk through their familiar wooden door, smiling at her with warm, gentle eyes. They had lived this way for nearly 7 years since their wedding. No storms, no major arguments, just a soft, classical rhythm of life that never seemed to falter. Mark worked in finance. His job was demanding, but he always made time for their little family. Sometimes he brought home small pastries Clara liked, or a single rose with a handwritten note, to the most wonderful woman in the world. Those little things, to Clara, were everything. A hug from behind while she was chopping vegetables, a light kiss on the forehead when she was tired, or a tender glance while watching an old film. These made her feel like she was living in a sweet dream come true. Clara never asked for more. She didn't wish for mansions or luxury cars, nor did she long for 5-star vacations. The one thing she truly yearned for was to feel genuinely loved, to feel protected, and to be her true self in the presence of the man she loved. She often told herself that not everyone was fortunate enough to have a peaceful, fulfilling life like hers, a warm home, a husband who always returned to her, and a daily routine filled with familiar comforts. But it is that very sense of perfect stability that often blinds people. The happier we are, the less we tend to question. Clara never doubted anything. She trusted Mark the way she trusted the air she breathed. She didn't think much of the occasional late work nights. She didn't ask why he sometimes glanced at his phone, smiled softly, then quickly tucked it away. To her, love meant absolute trust, and she believed she was doing it right. What Clara didn't know, however, was this: the things that look the most perfect are often the most fragile. Like a glass so clean you can no longer see it until someone walks into it and it shatters. Clara had no idea that the moments she considered so dependable were actually a delicate veil hiding something deeper, colder, and far more unfamiliar. Love sometimes is like a fairy tale we get too swept up in so much that we forget to check whether the story was ever real. Clara believed she was living in the happy ending, but the real story was only just beginning. The quiet change. As autumn slowly drifted in and golden leaves began to fall gently onto the backyard, Clara kept her daily rituals. She tidied the house, adjusted the curtains, and prepared dinner as usual. Yet something in the air had shifted. It wasn't loud or abrupt. It was quiet, subtle, like a faint breeze passing through an open window, too light to shatter anything, but strong enough to make someone who paid attention realize that something wasn't quite right anymore. Mark began talking more about work. Phrases like, "I need to work late tonight," and "there's an urgent project" became part of their routine. Clara, trusting without hesitation, smiled and kissed him goodbye each evening. She didn't question him. In her world, Mark was still the man who once said, "I will never let you feel alone." But loneliness started creeping in. Not with drama or explosions. It came silently, like tiny needles pricking at her heart. Not painful enough to scream, Nev, but just enough to weigh it down. Dinner used to be the warmest part of her day. Now it became the loneliest. Clara still made all of Mark's favorite dishes. She still lit the candles and set the table with care. But the seat across from her was always empty. Time ticked by as she sat alone, staring at the reflection of her own face on the polished surface. The soup cooled. The wine lost its shimmer. The kitchen, though lit, grew cold. Mark came home later and later, sometimes close to midnight. He would walk in, weary-faced, without the warmth in his eyes. No longer did he search for her gaze. He'd quickly eat a little food, say a few short words, then retreat upstairs. No more back hugs, no more kisses on the forehead, no more laughing over silly stories from her day. Clara started noticing things. A strange perfume clinging to his collar, a faint lipstick stain on a coffee mug that wasn't hers, the way he avoided her eyes when she asked if he was okay. And his short, empty replies, just one word, and no affection behind it. She felt like a ghost inside her own home. At night, she would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the space beside her growing colder. Mark turned away in his sleep. He didn't reach for her hand. There were no whispers in the dark, only the ticking of the clock and his heavy, indifferent breathing. She thought about asking, about confronting him, about sitting him down and saying, "I feel like you're slipping away from me." But fear gripped her. What if he told her the truth? What if her quiet little world came crashing down? What if all she believed in was just a dream built on silence? Like many women who love too deeply, Clara chose denial. She told herself he was just stressed, that all men need some space, that things would go back to the way they were. But somewhere inside her, a voice kept whispering, if he still loved you, he wouldn't leave you alone like this for so long. Every morning, Clara still brewed 2 cups of coffee, still folded his shirts neatly, still sent loving text messages, but most went unanswered, or worse, returned with cold emojis. She smiled sadly, wondering, could he be living another life beyond the one I see? While she poured herself into their marriage, was he quietly slipping away without a word? One day, she opened the wardrobe and noticed a few of his shirts were missing. His side of the closet looked emptier. Her heart clenched, but she tried to brush it off. Maybe he took them to the cleaners. Maybe he left them at work. But deep down, a sense of dread began to grow. These tiny, almost invisible changes were adding up. The once stable ground beneath her feet was starting to crack. Clara continued pretending everything was fine, but inside something was breaking. Slowly, quietly, she was fading, the clue in the coat. That morning, the air was colder than usual. Clara stood in the laundry room, her hands trembling slightly from the icy water. But truth be told, it wasn't just the cold. There was a strange heaviness in her chest, one she couldn't explain. As usual, she went through the motions folding clothes, checking pockets, a routine she had kept for years. Nothing ever appeared in those pockets, until today. In the inner pocket of Mark's dark gray coat, the one he hadn't worn much lately, Clara found a small, crumpled piece of paper. She opened it without thinking, not expecting anything unusual. But there it was, a printed receipt from the Grand Hotel. A luxurious place downtown, well known for romantic getaways and discreet encounters. The date printed on it matched exactly the night Mark had told her he had an urgent meeting and wouldn't be coming home. And there, in clear bold letters, it said, "Room service for 2 guests." 2 guests. Clara froze. The world seemed to mute itself. The sound of the washing machine faded. The birds outside stopped singing. She stood there, staring at the paper, as if it could talk, as if it would suddenly whisper the truth she wasn't ready to hear. Room service. 2 guests. One night she had spent alone. Questions flooded her mind like a dam bursting open. Who was the other person? Why would he need a hotel room? Was it really just a meeting? Maybe it was for a group? Maybe the room was booked by mistake? How she tried to find a version of the story that didn't involve betrayal. But her heart already knew. She sat down, holding the receipt in her trembling hands. Her eyes didn't blink. Her breath slowed. She was trying to make sense of a moment that shattered everything. She thought about that night, the dinner she made, the messages she sent, the chair across from her empty. She remembered telling herself, he's just working late. He'll be home soon. He wasn't. And now she knew why. The signs were all there. The late nights, the dodged questions, the distant look in his eyes, the unfamiliar perfume, the silence. But this piece of paper, this cold, heartless receipt, was different. It was proof. She looked at it again. The room number, the time, the handwriting of the waiter on the back. Someone had ordered red wine, chocolate mousse, 2 sets of silverware. Clara felt like she was going to be sick. And yet, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her grief didn't explode. Instead, it settled into her bones like winter. Quiet, sharp, irrevocable. She didn't know who the woman was, or how long it had been going on. But one thing was now terrifyingly clear. Mark had crossed a line, and everything Clara believed in had just collapsed. She clutched the receipt like it was his confession. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. Her world was no longer intact. Everything had changed. The truth in the phone. That night, in the same room where laughter once echoed and promises were whispered, Clara lay beside the man she had shared nearly a decade of her life with. But now, instead of warmth, there was an unsettling chill crawling up her spine. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the window pane like a warning, a prelude to the storm about to unfold. Not a storm of weather, but one of the soul. She turned to look at Mark, lying next to her, breathing steadily, peacefully, like he had nothing to hide. His face was serene, innocent even, the kind of face that could convince anyone it had never done wrong. But that serenity only made the pit in Clara's stomach grow deeper. She couldn't shake off the image from earlier that morning of the hotel receipt she found in his coat pocket while doing the laundry. Grand Hotel. 2-person suite. Dated the same night Mark had told her he was in a late-night business meeting. She remembered that night clearly. She had cooked his favorite meal. Waited. Even sent him a text, sweet and simple. Don't forget to come home early. He didn't. And now that receipt whispered a different story. A story that didn't include business meetings or honest delays. Clara didn't want to believe it. Every part of her screamed for a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a team booking. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, something had shifted, and she knew she couldn't unsee what she had already seen. She reached over and picked up Mark's phone. Her fingers trembled. The screen lit up, asking for a passcode. Her heart pounded. Slowly, as if following some tragic script, she typed in their wedding date, October 6th, the day they vowed never to keep secrets. The phone unlocked. And just like that, Clara's world began to tilt. If there had been nothing to hide, there would be no passcode. If there had been something to hide, surely he wouldn't have used their wedding date. But perhaps that was the cruelest part, using love as camouflage for betrayal. She opened the message app. Threads of conversations scrolled past colleagues, friends, random notifications. But then, there it was. A name that stood out like a red flag, Sarah. Clara hesitated, her thumb hovering above the screen. One touch and truth would unravel. She tapped. The chat burst open. A flood of messages. Long, intimate, familiar. Pet names. Babe, my love. Can't stop thinking about last night. Mentions of hotel rooms. Secrets whispered through emojis. Plans for weekend escapes. And then one message that hit harder than all the rest. Does your wife suspect anything? Mark replied, no. She's sweet. She trusts me completely. Those words crushed Clara. Trust. A word she had wrapped around their marriage like armor. And now it was turned into mockery, into a shield Mark used to protect his lies. She kept reading, even though each sentence was a blade. Her face remained still, but inside, her soul screamed. This wasn't just about another woman. It was about a world she thought she knew, now collapsing at her feet. She clicked on Sarah's profile. A young woman. Stunning, confident, the kind of smile that knew what it had taken from someone else. But Clara didn't feel jealous. She felt hollow. She turned off the phone, placed it back silently, lay back down next to her husband. He stirred slightly, turned to face her, unaware, his breathing deep and steady, still holding on to a dream that didn't include guilt. And Clara, facing the ceiling, realized one thing with terrifying clarity. This was the night everything changed. The night she crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting golden shadows across the floor. Clara sat silently at the table, holding a cup of cold coffee. Her eyes were fixed on the doorway. The air felt unnaturally still, as if something unspoken hung heavy between the walls. When Mark entered the kitchen, he sensed it immediately. Something was terribly wrong. Clara's eyes weren't angry. They were calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that makes your stomach twist. She slid a piece of paper across the table, the hotel receipt. No questions. No screaming. Just cold, undeniable truth. Mark hesitated, then tried to smile awkwardly, his voice forced. It was just a meeting with a client, nothing serious. But Clara said nothing. She placed his phone on the table and pushed it toward him. The screen was unlocked. The messages were there. Short words, sweet tones, secrets, and betrayal. Cornered, Mark exhaled deeply and lowered his gaze. He confessed. Her name was Sarah, a new colleague, someone who made him feel alive again. He said it started with drinks after work and then things spiraled. One mistake. One night. But that one night shattered everything. He mumbled that he still loved Clara, but their life had become too stable, too peaceful, too predictable. He missed the thrill. Clara said nothing. Her mind replayed a reel of memories, the sleepless nights nursing their sick child, the dinners she cooked after long work days, the thoughtful gifts she gave him on days no one else remembered, all those quiet acts of love. Were they invisible to him? Her heart didn't shatter. It froze. And in that numbing silence, one question echoed. So everything I gave, every part of me I offered, meant nothing to you? She stood up slowly. No tears, no trembling, just calm determination built from the deepest kind of hurt. Her voice was soft, but it cut like glass. I want you to leave this house. Mark froze. Whatever apology he had prepared, whatever reasons, they died in his throat. There was no space for redemption in Clara's eyes. Not this time. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of a world built on trust. And at that very moment, Mark understood. He hadn't just betrayed a woman. He had lost a sanctuary. But this story isn't over yet. Mark left the house that cold gray afternoon with a suitcase in his hand. There were no tears, no dramatic goodbyes, not even a final embrace. Only the sound of the door shutting behind him, sharp and final, like a full stop at the end of a long, unfinished story. Clara didn't follow him to the door. She simply stood in the living room, her eyes fixed on the space he once filled. Her heart no longer ached. It had turned to stone. When the silence settled, she walked into their bedroom. Everything he left behind was still there. A shirt hanging behind the door. His favorite coffee mug with the faint mark of his lips. The half-read book with the corner of a page folded gently. Clara picked them up one by one. Her hands didn't tremble. Her face didn't flinch. She placed each item into a small box, then pushed it into the back of the closet. Not because she wanted to forget, but because looking at them felt like bleeding in slow motion. The house, once cozy and filled with shared routines, now felt cavernous. There were no footsteps echoing in the hallway, no scent of his cologne lingering on the pillow, no one to ask how her day was or offer her tea after a long evening. Only silence, and the echo of everything that used to be. Days passed. Clara became a shadow of herself. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep, she didn't cry. She just sat by the window for hours, staring blankly at the empty yard. Her emotions were drained. She wasn't numb. She was hollow. Mark's messages kept coming. Every day. Apologies. Pleas for another chance. He even came to the door once and waited all night in the cold just to speak to her. But Clara never replied. Not because she didn't hear, but because she didn't know what she felt anymore. Could she forgive him? Could shattered trust ever truly mend? Or was it time she accepted that the person she once loved no longer existed? Each morning, Clara woke up and looked at the empty side of the bed, whispering to herself, "Just get through today." One day would lead to another. And eventually, the silence would feel less heavy. The pain would fade into something dull, something survivable. But what Clara didn't know yet was that within that silence, something new was forming inside her. A stronger version of herself. One who no longer needed to be completed by someone else. One who could choose her own path. But that was tomorrow's Clara. Today, she was still the woman sitting quietly by the window, surrounded by unanswered questions and a silence too loud to ignore. A week had passed since Mark walked out the door. The house remained quiet, just as before. But inside Clara was a storm that refused to roar. No more tears, no more anger, only an endless exhaustion that wrapped around her like fog. One morning, as sunlight quietly slipped through the curtains, Clara reached for her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. Not out of habit, but as if she were searching for a lifeline, a thread to pull herself back. Her thumb hovered, then stopped on a name she hadn't seen in months. Emily. They hadn't talked for nearly half a year. Life got in the way. Distance grew. And perhaps Clara didn't want anyone to see how broken she was. But today, silence was too heavy. Her hands trembled as she tapped the call button. The line rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. Hello? That single word cracked something inside Clara. She couldn't speak. All that came out was a fragile sob, sharp like shattered glass. On the other end, Emily didn't ask questions. She just said, "Hold on, I'm coming." 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. Clara opened the door to find Emily standing there with takeout, a giant tub of ice cream, and a soft smile. There was no judgment in her eyes, no resentment for the silence, just a warm embrace that held Clara together when she felt like falling apart. They sat on the worn-out sofa, eating ice cream straight from the tub like they used to in college. Words were unnecessary. Presence was enough. Emily didn't ask what had happened. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't toss out cliched advice or motivational speeches. She was simply there, like a small candle lit in a dark room. And in that quiet moment, Clara smiled. It wasn't wide or strong or sure, but it was real. It was the first spark of something she hadn't felt in Day's life. They stayed up late, talking about everything but the pain. They laughed about old crushes, failed exams, terrible coffee dates, and the wild energy of being young and fearless. Clara found herself drifting into those memories, letting them wrap around her like a soft blanket. Emily didn't try to rebuild her. She just reminded Clara of the girl she used to be, bold, full of dreams, fiercely alive. And perhaps that girl still lived inside her, waiting. Before she left, Emily placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. Her voice is calm, yet firm. You don't have to be strong right now, but when you're ready, ask yourself, what kind of life do you want to live next? It wasn't a command, not even advice. It was an invitation, a gentle reminder that Clara still had a choice, that this chapter might be closed, but her story was far from over. As the door clicked shut, Clara returned to the sofa. The emptiness still lingered, but something had changed. The loneliness wasn't as sharp. The silence wasn't as suffocating. A small voice whispered inside her that maybe, just maybe, she would be okay. Not tomorrow. But someday. She would start again. Not with Mark, but with herself. From Clara's story, there is one that lingers in our minds. Sometimes what kills a relationship isn't the final goodbye. It's the silence that stretches over time. The dinners that grow cold day by day, and the eyes that no longer search for each other like they once did. And then one day, the truth shatters everything. No one is ever truly ready for that moment. The feeling of betrayal, of being placed behind sweet words once spoken in the name of forever, crushes the heart. But what made Clara strong wasn't the absence of pain. It was her decision not to live inside that pain forever. She stood up, not to get revenge or prove her strength, but to find herself again the woman who once believed in love and deserved to be loved fully in return. In the middle of the storm, the first light didn't come from a wise quote, but from the quiet presence of a friend like Emily. She didn't lecture, didn't ask too much. She was simply there. That was the moment Clara smiled again, a faint, almost invisible smile, but one filled with hope. Because in the end, we don't have to be strong all at once. We just need someone to hold our hand and gently ask, what kind of life do you want to live next? If you've ever been through something like Clara's betrayal, an empty relationship, or simply the feeling of being lost, remember this: you are not alone. Don't force yourself to forgive or move on too quickly. Let yourself hurt, then let yourself heal. Because one day when you look back, you'll realize it was the crack that helped you rediscover who you are. And if this story touched something deep within you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Kunzy Podcast English. Here, we don't just tell stories. We listen. We heal. We walk together. Every subscribe from you is one more step on the journey of learning English, not just through vocabulary and grammar, but through stories that touch the heart.